And before I begin, I should say once again a very happy Mother's Day to all of you, to my own mother. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Thanks for being a wonderful mom. And I'll be praying for all of the mothers throughout the world who are members of our Rosary Crusade. So as we begin the 17th day of preparation for the total consecration to Jesus through Mary, we'll have now the beginning of the apparition of Our Lady of Lourdes. And for those who might have just joined us, because my printer is not functioning at the moment, I'm using my laptop, which I'd prefer not to do in the chapel, but don't have another option. And so I have the great joy of sharing with you the beginning of this apparition. And this comes from Frederick Charles Husenbeth's Our Blessed Lady of Lourdes. On Thursday, the 11th of February, 1858, began that wonderful series of apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary at Lourdes, the truth of which is established by solid evidence beyond the possibility of a doubt. On that day, 3 poor young girls went out from the town of Lourdes at 11 o'clock to gather sticks for firewood. Lourdes is a town in southern France with about 5,000 inhabitants. And these children were Bernadette and Mary Subaru, who were sisters, ages 14 and 11, and then Jane Abadi, who was about 15, who lived near them. Bernadette was a weak, delicate child, small for her age, so her health wasn't very good. She had been put out to nurse, that is to help as a nurse, in a neighboring village named Bartre, and had remained there till within a fortnight of this time, usually employed in keeping the sheep. Though not always ill, she suffered from asthma, sometimes severely, and was never strong. Her parents were very poor. Her father was a miller, but was often without work. Bernadette was never sent to school. She could not read, nor even speak French, but knew only the common dialect of the poor people. She'd received no religious instruction, and all the prayers she knew were those of the Rosary, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Creed, the Glory be to the Father. But she was innocent, humble, and beloved by everyone who saw her, always fond of saying her Rosary on her knees while keeping the sheep, obedient, affectionate, and having the great horror of lies and of all sin. She didn't look like she was more than 11 or 12 years old, but in reality she was 14. It was time for her to be prepared for her first communion, and it was for that important duty that her parents had taken her home to Lourdes. So let's stop for a moment to realize one beautiful teaching from this already. Bernadette is sick. She's never had any schooling of any kind, not even catechetical teaching to this point. She's 14 years old, but looks younger because she's weak and has a poor constitution. Her family is extremely poor. She's had to even be sent away from her family to make money working already at a young age. She's working keeping the sheep. And this is a young lady whose life is about to impact the entire world, who's about to have one of the most wonderful lives that we can imagine. That's a good lesson for us, that we often feel because of something I don't have, because of my poor health or economic situation or family situation or lack of opportunities or learning, that my life can't really be as good as it might be. And St. Bernadette is one of many wonderful examples that that's not at all true. And so you can rejoice in the great plans that God has for you, whatever your situation might be. A fortnight after she came home, on the 11th of February, 1858, it was Thursday before Quinquagesima Sunday, her sister Mary and Jane Abadi were sent to pick up a few sticks because they had no fuel even to be able to cook their dinner. Bernadette's mother was unwilling to let her go with them because Bernadette had a cough. But she begged hard to go, and at the entreaty of the other two girls, the mother consented. Bernadette wore on her head a handkerchief tied in a knot on one side. But lest she should increase her cold, her mother told her to put on her capulet over it, which is a very becoming article of dress, serving both as a hood over the head and a mantle over the shoulders, reaching nearly all down the back. Her dress was an old patched frock of coarse black stuff, and she had wooden shoes like the other two girls, but on account of her delicate health, her mother made her wear stockings, which neither of the others had. The three girls then set off together and went down a long strip of meadowland till they came just opposite the rocks of Masabe. Her companions were a little on before Bernadette. They had picked up a few sticks, but she had got none. Between them and the rocks was a mill stream, which happened to be almost dry at the time, owing to the mill being under repairs, so that they were tempted to pass over it, because they could see plenty of firewood on the other side lying about the rocks. These rocks are called Masabiel, which means old rocks, and are about a mile west of the town of Lourdes. In front of these rocks is a cave or grotto about 13 feet high and about 3 times as broad. It was always perfectly dry inside, except that in rainy weather there was a little moisture as you entered on the right hand, from the rain driven by the winds, but the top and left side were always completely dry. There's a reason why that'll be important later on. There were 2 openings above this cave. The principal one was an oval shape and high enough for a person to stand upright in it. It was from 6 to 8 feet above the ground. From these openings, the rocks rose to an enormous height, covered partly with box and ivy, fern, brambles, and moss. There's a reason why that's important to know. So the cave, it's about 13 feet high, about 40 feet wide, this beautiful cave. I hope one day you'll have a chance to visit there. And then off to this side, about 8 feet off the ground, there is this like an oval shape, very small cave jutting back in, or little niche, and about big enough for a person to stand in it. And that'll be very important, as you'll see, for the visits of Our Lady. Mary and Jane shook off their wooden shoes, held them in their hands, and walked barefoot through the shallow water of the stream, but complained bitterly of the coldness of the water when they put on their shoes again on the other side. For it was early in February, and the water from the snowy mountains was icy cold. Bernadette was still on the other side. She had stockings on and was afraid to venture across when she heard the others complain of the coldness of the water. She called out to them to throw some big stones into the middle of the stream so that she could step over dry. But Jane answered, "Do as we did. Pull off your stockings and shoes." Bernadette at last made up her mind to cross over and began to pull off her stockings. It was now about 12 o'clock, and as she was pulling off one stocking, leaning against a piece of rock, she heard a high wind getting up in the meadow. But when she looked back, she saw nothing. There was no wind. The poplar trees on the banks of the river Gave did not move. The air was perfectly still. She thought she'd been mistaken, but knew not what to make of it. She went on pulling off her stockings, and in a moment she heard a loud rush of wind again, which beat against the hollow of the rock. She looked up towards the grotto and saw a wild rose bush, which hung down at the sides of it, swinging about. She tried to cry out, but could not. Her voice seemed stifled in her throat. She trembled all over and sunk down upon her knees, and you'll see why. In the hollow niche above the large cave, so that this niche I was talking about that's over here, in front of which Mary and Jane were busy picking up sticks. They were right in front of this cave picking up their sticks while Bernadette's waiting to cross the river towards them. In that niche there then appeared all at once to Bernadette a bright light, in the midst of which stood a lady of incomparable beauty. The brightness round about her did not pain or dazzle the eyes like that of the sun, but seemed, on the contrary, to invite the sight to repose in it with inexpressible delight. The lady was of middle height, appearing to be about 20 years old. Her beauty was heavenly, not to be compared to anything here below. Her eyes were blue, and she had a look of sweetness which seemed to melt the heart of the beholder. She wore a robe of the purest white, with a white veil upon her head, which fell down her back in ample folds as low as her robe. She had a blue girdle tied loosely around her waist, and falling in 2 bands almost as far down as her robe. Her feet were uncovered, and a golden-colored rose appeared upon each foot. She stood upon the edge of the niche, or hollow in the rock, and her feet seemed just to touch the branches of the wild rose bush. She wore no rings, nor bracelets, nor jewels, nor crown, but she had her hands joined, and from them hung a rosary. So her hands were together with the rosary hanging down. So with the rosary, the beads of which were white like crystal, and the wires which held them together were like gold. Bernadette, quite overcome with astonishment, rubbed her eyes, looked up again, and as she herself described her feelings, she knew not what the vision was, but she seemed to see and not to see at the same time. The beautiful lady most graciously smiled to encourage her, but said nothing. Bernadette took out a rosary and tried to make the sign of the cross, but could not. Her hand fell down powerless as if paralyzed. Then the lady took up the golden cross of her own rosary and made the sign of the cross with it in a most grave and graceful manner, making a sign to the child to do the same, which she immediately did, and ever after made it in the same way, to the edification of all who saw her. What that means is people who later saw Saint Bernadette make the sign of the cross when she was praying said it was amazing. Just seeing her make the sign of the cross, something in her prayerfulness, in her reverence, because she learned from what she saw in Our Lady, was extremely moving, just seeing Bernadette make the sign of the cross. The lady then dropped her beads, but never moved her lips, while the girl devoutly recited her rosary, still on her knees. And so Our Lady, of course, wasn't saying the Hail Mary to herself. She wasn't moving her lips, but she had her rosary in her hands while Bernadette was saying the rosary. Bernadette's 2 companions noticed her praying the rosary, and her sister said to the other, "Look at Bernadette saying her prayers." To which Jane replied, "Oh, what a saint! Why doesn't she keep her prayers to say them in the church?" Upon which Mary said, "Let us leave her alone. She can do nothing but say her prayers." When Bernadette had finished her rosary, the lady smiled most graciously and made a sign to come near, but she was afraid. The vision then disappeared, and Bernadette saw nothing but the hollow in the rock, looking as it did before, and her companions, after finishing their work, running about in the cave to warm their feet. Bernadette now finished pulling off her stockings, and without any fear of the cold water, walked barefoot through it to join her companions. When she came up to them, she said, "What storytellers you are! You said the water was cold, and I found it quite warm." Now remember, this is February, where the water is icy cold in that part of France. To which they replied, "Oh yes, warm indeed. The river gave, warm in winter." "Yes," she answered, "I tell you I find it as soft and warm as the water we wash things with." Her sister stooped down to feel Bernadette's feet, and found them quite warm. "Didn't you see anything?" she said to them. And they observed that while she spoke, she appeared much affected and agitated. "No," they said. "Did you see anything?" Whether Bernadette was afraid of profanation by telling what her soul was so full of, or whether she wished to enjoy it in silence, she felt timid. She obeyed the instinct which prompts humble souls to conceal the favors of heaven, and she merely answered, "If you have seen nothing, then I have nothing to say to you." As they were going home, however, Mary and Jane teased Bernadette to tell them what she had seen. She at last complied with their wishes, but not till they had promised to keep it secret. The two girls, after hearing her account of the vision, fully believed it. But it made them very much afraid, and they said, "Perhaps it is something come to do us harm. Don't let us go there again, Bernadette." When these children got home, they soon broke their promise to keep the secret. Mary told her mother all about it, who said, "All this is childish nonsense." "What does my sister tell me then?" said Mary. And Bernadette began to give her account. Their mother only shrugged up her shoulders and said, "You are mistaken. It was nothing at all. You thought you saw something, but you saw nothing. These are mere fancies and children's tales." Bernadette persisted in her account, but her mother said, "Well, anyhow, don't go there again. I forbid you to do so." This was heartbreaking to Bernadette, for ever since the apparition had vanished, she had had the greatest longing to see it again. However, she was quite resigned to her mother's will, and said nothing. When she came to say her night prayers, she could not pronounce the words, "Mary conceived without sin," but stopped and sobbed out loud. She passed a night of troubled sleep, and the next day could eat nothing. She felt a strong desire to see the lady again. Her two companions were divided between fear and curiosity. Meantime, her mother related the account to her neighbors, and it soon got spread about. And we will find out tomorrow what happens next. So God bless all of you. A very happy Mother's Day to all the mothers praying with us throughout the world. And I'll pray now with you the Memorare. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thine intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly into thee, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us. Amen.